Hello and welcome to this Lunch and Learn session, this yarning circle and dialogue briefing on the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the Voice campaign and the upcoming referendum. My name is Charlotte Connell. This is my last week here at Climate Salad, but I am joined by my wonderful teammates, which is fantastic to see. And we're joined here with Uluru Youth Dialogue Ambassador Bridie Zorse, who is a proud Wiradjuri woman and current law and arts student at UNSW, and also Bryony Benjamin, who's working with the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And I'm really, really happy to see Darryl Lyons, co-founder of Rainstick, who is an amazing founder in our community, as well as proud Kamilaroi woman Camille Goldstone Henry, who will take us through the Uluru Statement of the Heart. But before I hand over the virtual mic, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land of which we meet. And I appreciate that's different for all of us. For me, that's the Gubbi Gubbi people. Wanya Nullam, welcome and hello. And thank you so much for joining us. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and honour their continuous connection to country, land and sea, and recognise our First Nations people as our original climate tech innovators. Camille, I will hand over to you and I will put a spotlight on you so everyone can see your wonderful face.
Thanks, Charlotte. I am calling in today from the lands of the Gadigal and Birrabirragal people. I'm in Bondi and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For those who don't know, Bondi is actually a local Indigenous name and it means waves crushing on the rocks. So if you're ever walking around Bondi, you can see how true that name actually is and how much place means for First Nations peoples. So I'm going to read the Uluru Statement from the Heart today. And if you haven't read it, it's very, very moving. I highly recommend you get it up on a screen. If we're in a room, I'd normally ask you to read it along out loud with me, but that doesn't work so well on Zoom. So please do pull it up on your screen and feel free to say it along and with obviously on mute. Otherwise it's going to be an absolute car crash. Fantastic. So this is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture, from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That people possessed a land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years. With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australians' nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspiration for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future.
Thank you so much, Camille. I'm a little bit moved by that. So, but I will pass over to Bryony, who will tell us why we're here today. And thank you for sharing the Uluru Statement from the Heart, because that is grounded in what the Voice referendum is all about. So I'll pass to you, Bryony.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, and thank you, Camille. Goosebumps listening to you read that out. So a really special way to start the session. As Charlotte said, my name's Bryony. I am working to support the Uluru Statement and predominantly from a social media campaign and influencer campaign that we're starting to roll out. So I'll share a little bit about that at the end of the presentation, but we're really lucky to be joined by Bridie today. Sorry, I know it's confusing, a Bridie and a Bryony, but just call us the Bees, that's fine. Who is a member of the Uluru Youth Dialogue and has been doing so much work towards this referendum in the background and working with communities. So Bridie, we'll hand over to you. And I just wanted to say as well, please do ask questions as we go. Feel free to, we want this to be interactive as we go. So yeah, great. Over to you, Bridie.
Hey everyone. Can you all see my screen? Okay, great. Yeah, so my name is Bridie.
Sorry, I was just going to say we're just seeing all the slides. We're not just seeing just needs to be on the slideshow mode.
Sorry, it literally says it's in black. Hold up. Sorry.
No, don't worry. No stress.
This is me every online workshop, so don't stress at all.
Okay, hold on.
Loading. Yeah, like what's before.
Okay, is that working now?
Still loading.
Still loading. Yeah.
Sorry. Anyways, while it's loading, I'll just I want to acknowledge country as well. So I'm really fortunate to be back on country in Lithgow on Wiradjuri lands at the moment, doing some community info sessions. So thank you so much for having me today. Let me just try to do this again. Okay, is that working now?
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, so today we'll just be going through a bit of information on the Uluru Statement, what the Voice is. It's not super formal, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll answer them when we go. Yeah, so who we are. So the Uluru Dialogue was established in 2017. It's currently co-chaired by Professor Megan Davis and Auntie Pat Anderson. And the Uluru Dialogue represents the cultural authority of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We lead community education on the reforms called for in the Uluru Statement, such as the Voice and Treaty and Truth. The Uluru Youth Dialogue, which is what I'm a part of, sits directly under the Uluru Dialogue. We're co-chaired by Alira Davis and Bridget Thummer. Very strong, staunch First Nations women. So that's the group I'm from. A lot of the delegates to the regional dialogues and the national convention are a part of us or associated with us as well. So what is the Voice? So the Voice is about two main things. Firstly, it's about recognizing First Peoples in the Constitution. Recognition in the Constitution, the way we want to do that is by amending the Constitution to establish a First Nations voice to Parliament. So a First Nations voice to Parliament is the structural reform we're calling for. We envision the First Nations voice to give grassroots First Nations peoples a say on the issues that directly affect us. It'll be independent from Parliament and it'll be able to advise Parliament on the laws and policies they're making about our lives and, you know, other issues that pop up. 83% of First Nations people support the Indigenous voice to Parliament, which I think is really important to start off with. Obviously, we're not a homogenous group. We're not all going to think the same, but I still think 83% is a really significant number when we're talking about, a change or a reform that's this big. And sometimes I like to compare it to the same-sex marriage plebiscite that happened. We didn't even have that much support in that instance. So I think it's really significant how high support is for this. But back to the voice, sorry, jumping around a bit. The voice is envisioned by the delegates to the regional dialogues process that led to the statement as a voice that gives us, some say and some self-determination and structural power over our lives. At the moment, the government can, make laws and policies about us. They don't have to consult us. And what we're seeing is that's not bringing change to our communities. I don't need to go through all the closing the gap statistics or anything to make it clear that currently we're not in the best place as a country. And by having a voice and giving, grassroots First Nations people that are experiencing issues a say and a platform to have their voices heard, that will manifest in better outcomes and better laws and policies that are better directed into the areas we need them to be. So the voice and constitutional recognition isn't something we just came up with in 2017. Specific work on constitutional recognition of First Nations peoples has been happening for well over a decade. So I think it was the Gillard government that originally started this process we're in now. There have been a million joint selects committees and reports that have been handed down, and I won't go through all of them. But I think the really key thing to mention is in 2015, 40 senior Indigenous leaders from across the country issued the Kirribilli Statement. So this was issued after, however many years of government processes and reports. We hadn't gotten anywhere. And the Kirribilli Statement, rejected symbolism. In the statement, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the specific words written down, but essentially it said that any constitutional reform must involve structural change that will empower our people and set the basis to give us better outcomes. So in response to the Kirribilli Statement, the government, so Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten at the time, established the Referendum Council. So it was the Referendum Council's First Nations members that designed the process that led to the Uluru Statement and the situation we're in now. So there's this question in the chat here. So although there's this dialogue, it's political, but actually multiple PMs have backed this across the political divide. So originally this didn't start as a political issue. Obviously you need politicians and political parties to get to a referendum, but this really was a grassroots movement that consulted, grassroots First Nations people. And we've seen political backing across all parties. Obviously I'll get into Labor a bit later, but they supported the statement in full. The Greens have supported the voice and the statement, and some Liberal MPs have also supported it. My local member, my federal member, actually, Andrew G, recently left the Nationals to support it as well. So, it's not like a political divide. There's a broad range of support across many different political parties with this. But yeah, so sorry, let me just move my screen. So this process was the largest First Nations consultation process in history. Up until this point, we hadn't seen First Nations consulted on the level they were. Sorry, technical difficulties. So the Referendum Council, as I said before, it was made up of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous members, but it was the Indigenous members of the council, such as Professor Megan Davis, Noel Pearson, and Annie Pat Anderson, that designed the consultation model of the regional dialogues. So across 2016 and 2017, there were 12 regional dialogues held. About 100 people were invited to each, and this was determined by the local and regional communities. people also just rocked up on the day, which was totally fine. They were let in as well. And at each of these dialogues, people were asked what constitutional reform and what constitutional change meant to them. So each dialogue discussed their preferences. They discussed 5 or 6 key reform options, such as treaty, obviously the voice, a statement of recognition, either inside or outside of the Constitution. And the overwhelming consensus at each regional dialogue was to call for a voice first. So each regional dialogue elected representatives to then take essentially the minutes of their dialogue and what happened at their dialogue to a national convention, which was held at Uluru in May of 2017. So it was at this national convention that everyone got together, spoke about each regional dialogue, their preferences, what they wanted to call for, and came up with the overwhelming consensus of voice, treaty, and truth, sequenced in that order. It is important to note that although over 1,200 delegates were consulted, it was the largest consultation process, but a lot of people question, why there wasn't more dialogues. I don't think that that's, in any way I don't even know what I'm saying, sorry. I don't think that's, something that should be held against the voice. This was the largest consultation process, but it is important to note that not everyone was consulted with this, and not everyone could be consulted with this. I might personally, my family and myself, we weren't consulted. I'm pretty sure I was like 13 at the time, so I had no business being in that room. But we've continued the work after these dialogues by going out to community, talking about these reforms, and again, 83% of First Nations support this. There were also 7 delegates that walked out, which is totally fine. I think that's important to note as well. Again, we're not a homogenous group. We're not all going to think the same. But it is important to note that there were people that walked out of that convention as well. But yeah, getting into the statement. So again, it calls for the sequenced order of reforms, firstly of a voice to Parliament, and second for a Makarrata Commission that would oversee treaty and truth processes. Alongside the voice, so recently this year, the referendum question and amendment was released. Alongside that, the referendum working group, which is made up of First Nations leaders from across the country, released voice design principles that have been endorsed by the government. So these design principles kind of give us, a basis and an idea of what the voice will look like if the referendum is successful. So I'm not going to read all of them out, but you can see on the screen here some of the design principles. If you're interested in doing a deep dive, there's more info on our website, ulurustatement.org. But essentially, it's setting out the foundation, saying that the voice will give independent advice to Parliament and government. It'll be chosen by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people based on the wishes of local communities. And it will be representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, gender balanced, and include youth. I think the 2 that I just read out are the most important thing. There are over 250 distinct First Nations in this country. We're all really diverse. We all have our own languages, our own, ways of doing things. So it's really important that the voice is reflective of that. A voice that's going to suit me and my community, my family on Wiradjuri country is not going to be the same as something that will suit people in Yuin country or, on the West Coast. So I think it's really important to note that, this will be reflective of us and our communities. It will also not have a veto power. So the voice won't be able to go to government and be like, nah, we don't like this, you're not doing it. It's there to give advice. That's the key thing there. So it also won't have a program delivery function, and it will work alongside already existing structures and organizations. So how we got here, I've already gone through it a little bit. It has been a long journey, but yeah, that's a little bit of a timeline just so you can see, the process leading up to it, where the statement was issued in 2017. And yeah, in 2018, Malcolm Turnbull, who originally started this process, rejected the voice. Auntie Pat and Professor Davis took the no, flipped it into a yes, and that's where we are now. So earlier this year, Anthony Albanese in his last year rather, God, time flies. Last year, Anthony Albanese supported the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. I think it was the first thing he said in his acceptance speech, which was really, really cool. And that's pretty much kicked off where we are now. Anthony Albanese committed to a referendum in his first term of government, and now we're seeing that we're well on our way to a referendum, and it's likely to happen towards the end of this year in October. But it's also really important to explain, you know, the process to change the constitution and what we're actually going through at the moment. So the constitution is essentially our country's guiding document. So it determines the powers of parliament and the powers they have to make laws that govern us. And the only way to change the constitution is through a referendum. So currently in our nation's founding document, the Constitution, First Nations people are not recognised in there at all. And, you know, obviously when the Constitution was getting written, we were excluded from that process as well, which, you know, was a real shame. But that's why we're changing it. So to change the Constitution, there's essentially 4 steps. So the first, a constitution alteration bill entered Parliament and has to pass. That passed, I think, almost a month ago now. So we're well on our way to getting there. We still haven't got a date yet, but we're anticipating it'll be mid-October. So after the bill is passed, stage 2, which we're in now, so members of Parliament will provide yes and no cases. That'll be put into a pamphlet by the AEC, and it'll be sent out along with a copy of the question and amendment to every Australian voter that's on the electoral roll. It's also important to note that this pamphlet isn't actually fact checked, so they can put essentially whatever they want in it. And there's no official like fact checking process or anything. So that's why a lot of the work we do is in community and doing that education so people don't get this pamphlet. Yeah, it is crazy. I wasn't even aware that it wasn't fact checked until a few weeks ago. So it's really important, you know, that people encourage their friends and families to get out there and educate themselves. And then obviously we'll go to a referendum. It's just the same as like a federal election. There'll be polling booths set up at, you know, schools, churches, public spaces, and Australians will write yes or no in a box on whether they support the proposed change to the constitution.
Right. Can I just
yeah.
A question? Sorry. So, and just to get my head around it as well. So the referendum is for recognition of First Nations people in the Constitution and also a voice, a representative body.
Yeah, so the chosen form of recognition is through the voice. So I'll show you the amendment in question in like 2 seconds.
Oh, thank you. I've jumped ahead.
So, yeah, but no, so this is the question that everyone will vote yes or no to. So it just reads, you know, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? So basically it's saying that we're going to recognise First Nations people. How we're going to do that is by establishing the voice, if that answers your question. And I'm kind of jumping around a bit. I can't access my speaker notes. So if you have any questions or if I haven't made something clear enough, just jump in, please.
You're incredibly clear, so do not worry. But Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, I see it in the chat here. So I can answer that just after I go through this, if that works, just because I feel like it'll flow better. So just like touching on, I won't read it out, but this is the proposed amendment that will be added to the Constitution if the referendum is successful. Basically, it's just saying that there will be a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The voice may make representations to Parliament and the executive government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And the third bit, so the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. So essentially what this means is when we vote in the referendum, we're voting on the principle of having a voice. after the referendum, the government has committed to a further consultation process to settle the voice design. This is deliberate. By having the voice design set in legislation, it means we're not locked into a model, and allow flexibility. A voice that works for us right now might be different to a voice that works in 5, 10, 20 years. So by having that flexibility and being able to, change things that aren't working with its composition and functions, it not only allows us to plan for the long term instead of 4-year government cycles, but I think that's really key to ensuring this voice is a success for our communities. So changing the constitution is important for us because not only will it recognize us in our country's founding document, the recognition of First Nations peoples and our culture will be in a substantial way. It won't be symbolic, it'll actually bring change and will provide us with a say on the issues that affect us. And there's a thing there, Australia is the only liberal democracy in the world that has a colonial history and doesn't recognize First Peoples in its founding document or constitution, which I think is really important to, consider. But I'll answer this question from Rob. So the question is, from your perspective, how might we advance our climate organizations and solutions to ensure we center the voices' goals? I think that's a really, really good question. I can speak from a personal perspective. I think, it's important to not only support the voice, but in, the local communities and regional communities you engage with, looking at the voice and its goals and working out how you can implement that in a way that, is reflective of the spaces you're working in, and the communities you work with. We all have voices, it's just, we need to be heard. And this happens not only on a federal level, when we get the voice up this year, because we will, fingers crossed, but it's important that we carry that on and give people in local communities a say, not only in laws and policies, but in climate activism and solutions as well. We've been taking care of this land for 66,000 years. We have those solutions that we need. Obviously the landscape's changed a bit, but I think just engaging with people in the local area is the most important thing. And yeah, New Zealand did recognize, so they had the Treaty of Waitangi. Obviously that's not perfect as well, but I think it kind of puts it into a perspective. Our neighbors across the ocean have been, have recognized Maori people for, I'm not sure of the date either, but for a while now. They have treaty and everything there as well. So I think it's important to, compare us to other countries in the world that have a similar history and say, why aren't we there yet? Why is this is the opportunity of a lifetime. So 1967 was the last referendum we had where First Nations people were counted as part of the population. That was our most successful referendum in this country's history. I think that, I think the delegates to the regional dialogues, especially the elders that attended, were really specific in saying that, in 1967, the Australian people walked with us. Now in 2023, they're going to walk with us again on this issue. I don't think personally we can afford to wait another 50 something years for a moment like this to happen again. Clearly not enough has been done to address, the gaps that we face in healthcare, education, criminal justice. Proportionally, we're the most incarcerated people on this planet. Something needs to be done. And I think now is the moment while we have this chance to get that done. I have a question here. How does a voice compare to a treaty in New Zealand? So obviously it's like two separate countries, two similar but different situations. Yes, so Charlotte's just put a response. The treaty.
You answer, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So it's a bit different in New Zealand. I have family over there, and just from talking with them, so treaty, I couldn't tell you the specifics of what the treaty in New Zealand calls for, but we never had a treaty here. Normally a treaty is negotiated first contact, which is what happened in New Zealand. And, people came together, were like, we want this, we will give you this. And I think there are designated seats in Parliament for Maori. I'm not entirely sure, but having a voice here is different. Obviously, it's a different situation. We've never had treaty. We weren't even recognised until 1967. Having a voice here is a first step. Essentially, it allows us to have a say on the issues that affect us, and then to be able to, embark on treaty processes that are effective, and truth processes that aren't just a tick in the box. I don't think it's really comparable just because of how different a situation is. So the treaty is more like a negotiated settlement. Yeah. So makarata, it means agreement making. That's essentially how we view it. So it's where First Peoples and government will come to the table. They'll be like, okay, like, we want this, we'll give you this. We don't really know what the treaty will look like or what that process will look like here. This probably doesn't answer your question, and I'm waffling on a bit. I do encourage you to look at it yourself. Obviously it's a unique situation we're in right now. But yeah, if you have any other, okay, there's another question. Do we know how members of the voice would be selected, or would that process be determined after the referendum? Yes, so the specific process, like whether, it'll be like election, like local government or whatever, will be established after the referendum. And it'll be up to, local and regional communities to decide what works best for them. So that might be, a democratic process where people elect themselves, you go to a ballot. Communities might just nominate people. That'll be determined in the consultation process after the referendum.
And Bridie, I was just going to mention as well. That was that interesting point. I just heard Linda Burney talking the other day, is like the biggest point on that as well. It's like, it's not going to be government appointed. Like you said, it is appointed by local communities. And also just that thing on the treaty, because there are obviously some people that don't support the voice because they want treaty first, but I was really interested to learn that treaty could be a 10 to 15 year process, and we don't even have anything underway to even begin that. So a voice is not saying we don't want treaty, it's just the first step towards its voice. Treaty truth is the Uluru Statement in full, I suppose, isn't it? So yeah, that was something that I found
exactly. Exactly. Like, we don't know how long this treaty process will take, and we just can't afford to wait until we negotiate a treaty. So that's why the delegates sequence the voice first. It's about making practical changes now while we're embarking on treaty processes as well. So we haven't successfully amended the Constitution since 1977. And our last referendum, the Republic referendum, happened in 1999. So there are just some fun facts here. So at the time, I wasn't even alive. Cher was topping the charts, didn't have iPhones, no TikTok. It has been a while. This is also the first referendum we're having in the age of social media. So it's really important, that we engage social media with this. I feel like it can be a tool that's really useful. So on that note.
So, sorry, can I just ask also, Bridie, is this because, why can you as a government, produce a pamphlet for the yes and no and it not be fact checked? Is that because of political advertising? They don't have to be telling the truth, or is it where we will find more truth from social media, where they enact laws to be more truthful sometimes? Sorry, do you know the answer to that?
I'm not sure. I think it's a AEC thing. The AEC organises that pamphlet. There was a bill that was introduced earlier this year, it was a misinformation bill, to change, the rules that we have for referendums, which I'm imagining the pamphlet would be one, but that wasn't passed. I think so Chris has just put in the chat, there are no false advertising laws for electioneering. It was trying to get amended. That didn't happen. I'm honestly not really sure. It's kind of a bad thing, I believe, but you know, it's just a situation we're in, and it's just something we're going to have to deal with. But yeah, if anyone has any more questions, I know I've jumped around a fair bit, but if anyone has any questions about the voice or the statement or anything, now's your time to ask. If not, we'll jump over to the social media campaign and what you can do.
Yeah, maybe we'll keep rolling for now then, Bridie, and yeah, we'll see see if anything comes up, we can go. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today. I imagine a lot of you probably are well across the details of this, but it's always interesting that you know, no matter how informed a group is, there's things that they take away. And I think really interesting hearing it from your perspective, Bridie, as someone who's been so embedded in this movement and so across the detail. One way, you know, in terms of ways that you might want to get involved and activate, look, there's lots of ways. But one we would say, you know, for example, this session came about today because I was chatting with Charlotte. I do a lot of work in climate and work closely with Climate 200 and some other groups like that. And Charlotte was mentioning, oh, great, well, I could, you know, bring a group together. And so if you've got similar networks, or you think there's someone that should come to a briefing like this, or other influential people that you know, please send them our way, or via Charlotte can connect you, because that's, you know, one of the biggest things is just having conversations and bringing everyone along. And do you want to just whip to the next slide for me, Bridie? What I'm just going to share with you is we are launching a few phases of a social media campaign. So it's something perhaps some of your organizations might want to share, or on your own social media channels, on, you know, LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever you are. Like, I think it's, you know, we're running this program at the moment with some really big influential Australians that have gotten on board, but I say everyone is an influencer. You know, the average Australian has 300 followers across their social media. I'm sure many of you have a lot more than that, but, you know, just showing support. So what we've done is we've actually created these little voice notes. We've captured them from First Nations voices all around the country, and particularly a bunch of elders. We launched it last week. We had the likes of Hannah Gadsby, Midnight Oil, Missy Higgins come out and share these voice notes. And what we were trying to do is create a really gentle way for people to start sharing this on their channels. And so really you're just sharing the voice of a First Nations perspective on what the voice means to them. So next slide, Bridie. And the other important thing to notice is, yeah, so that's the first part, like as a stage one, to give people a chance to center Indigenous voices on social media. And next slide. And then there'll be more phases as we roll it out. So we'll be asking for ongoing support. So if that's something you're interested in, or your organization is, or you know someone, if you know someone that's got a following or is, you know, very engaged in different groups online, please let us know. But I will share those assets. Actually, I'll share them in the chat now. You can have a look, and I'll share to Charlotte the little created doc that comes with it. There's got some suggested captions, FAQs, how to answer any curly questions that might come up. And this is what the created toolkit going forward will look like in the next phase. So just sharing assets, if that's something you'd like to be a part of, that'd be fantastic. And I think, is there another slide there? I think, yeah, that's it. And the other point I just wanted to make is with this campaign, we understand that it can be, you know, complex, talking about something that isn't political but has become politicized on your channels. So we just have a rapid support phase around it, basically. So for example, last week an organization posted, they got a question back that they weren't sure about, contacted me, and we together with the Uluru statement formulated a response, so that you feel supported at every point. So yeah, that's it in terms of the presentation there. Charlotte, might pass back to
I have lots of questions, but I mean, I will open it up to obviously the entire floor. As a non-First Nations person, like it can feel really uncomfortable sometimes, because I don't know all the answers in how you support this. So have you advice on that, like as an ally, or how to, as a non-Indigenous person, you know, lend your influence, no matter how small that is, to this?
Yeah, I think, First Nations people, we only make up 3% of the population. So we really need the other 97% to walk with us. Personally, I think it's just about, like, if you support this, it's about being staunch in that, and still respecting, other First Nations views, whether we all agree on it or not. I think, it's just like anything, right? Anything you're passionate about, whether it's, climate change or environmental issues or First Nations issues, I think it's just about being staunch in what you believe in, and encouraging other people, specifically with this, to, get educated, encourage people to get educated and listen to First Nations voices and why we're calling for this, which is, again, like a great thing that this social media campaign is doing. It's platforming First Nations voices and, actually giving real answers from real people about this. I don't know if that really answers your question, but
it does. I think that nails it, Bridie. And also, I'll just add to what Bridie's saying. I think with a campaign like this or an organisation like this, the Uluru Statement has so much cultural authority within First Nations communities. This has been co-designed with the Uluru Statement and First Nations-led agency going north. So that you're getting on board with something that is, and as many of the leaders from this organisation say, as Bridie said, Indigenous Australians are 3% of the population. If we're not being a bit bold and getting out there and using our voices and our platforms, it's going to be really, really challenging to get the message out. So we all need to be courageous at the moment. And
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, I've been hiding, here's my camera. How are you guys?
Great.
So I was really impressed to see that percentage, greater than 80%, because that was one of my concerns, how representative is the voice and how many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders actually support the voice, right? Because I'm always one, I do support the voice, but I'm always one to see both sides of the story. And listening to some talkback radio, there've been some Aboriginal people here in Perth who have said, well, it's just tokenism and, it's not going to really make much change. So I would love to hear your opinion or counter opinion on that, so I can be armed, obviously, as well when, I have these discussions with people.
Yeah, for sure. Again, we're not a homogenous group. There are Indigenous people that don't support this. And I think, I really encourage everyone to get both sides of it before you make a decision. I think that's the only way you can be strong in making a decision. I don't think this is, tokenistic at all. I think the Uluru Statement sets out a journey, and the voice is the first step on this journey. I think, by having a voice, it'll give us a say on the issues that directly affect us. I don't think that's tokenistic. We deserve to have a seat at the table and be able to say, when things aren't working and what can change, to make better outcomes, not only for our communities now, but for our children and future generations. I think, it's really important to note that while the main focus is on the voice right now, we've still got treaty and truth to follow, and we're still gonna push for those things. Having a voice first just gives us, a bit of self-determination, a bit of power over our lives, and gives us, the platform to start pushing for treaty and start pushing for voice, but pushing for them in a way that is, not just a tick of a box, is actually effective and is making change.
Okay, so you really believe in it by the sounds of it.
I mean, yeah, I guess. No, I really believe in it. And, it's something that I've carried on from, my elders and my, my old ones and my past generations. They've all been really staunch in calling for, a seat at the table. Not only my direct ancestors, but just First Nations people in general. I think the first sort of call for a voice was William Cooper in 1930s. This is something that they've been calling for decades. So I don't think it's tokenistic. I think if it was truly tokenistic, we wouldn't be calling for it. But yeah. I think it's just about everyone, making their own decisions on it.
Yeah, thanks.
There's a question in the chat here. Is there a political breakdown of the agenda behind the No campaign? What's their game? I don't know, like, specifics. Just generally, I think you've got like your Jacinta Prices, your David Littleprouds, that don't think that this is necessary. Like, I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone in the No campaign because I'm not sure their like reasonings behind it. There are also people, calling for treaty first, and saying that the voice doesn't go far enough, which, totally like entitled to their opinion. I think I don't need to make it clear how I think on that. We're not just calling for the voice again, we're calling for voice and treaty as well. I don't know if there's been like a specific breakdown, but I really encourage you, if you were interested in it, I'm sure there's like articles and information out there that break it down in a way that I can't.
I'd add to that, Bridie, that it does seem pretty sporadic. Like you said, there are sort of two no camps, right? One is a genuine no, we don't think goes far enough, but for reasons that Bridie's outlined today, we've shared why she thinks it is actually the first great step. And then there's a no camp that are just causing chaos and and dysfunction. So yeah. Lots of arguments there, but I love what Bridie said as well, about, First Nations people are not a homogenous group, and we don't expect white people to all agree on everything. Why do we expect the same from First Nations people? So 83% is actually a pretty astounding figure.
With just a little bit over 10 minutes left, I just want to throw to Daryl and Camille as well to share their perspectives. Daryl, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. I'm just keen to, I guess, share a bit of my family history and how that relates to, I guess, my connection with my climate journey. So I guess when the Constitution was formed, my great-grandmother was taken in as a maid/slave at cattle property on our country. And unfortunately, through the hardship she endured, and that was as a 4-year-old. And I guess in our mob, we're the only survivors that are direct descendants from her, from Marawali country, and that's twice the size of Tasmania. So it was quite like a big shame. And unfortunately, the way through her hardship, my grandmother and my great uncles were believed in hiding their Aboriginality, and that even transformed into my mum and my uncles and aunties, even to this day. And unfortunately, my great uncles, when they passed away, they still denied they had any Aboriginality, which is like a real shame. So I think this voice is really, really important for a lot of people who've experienced a lot of hardships through that as they go forward. And luckily, my auntie kind of really engaged her Aboriginality from a young age and really fought for that, and basically exposed me to that journey. So as we go out to country, and we do a lot of cultural heritage work out there now a couple of times a year, and it's kind of a remarkable country that's in my background picture. It's semi on the edge of desert in southwest Queensland, which is called a Diamantina Channel country. And we thrived out there, and in this remarkable environment. And this now ties into, I guess, my mission with acknowledging some of the traits of our history and combining that with new technology to help assist the agriculture system to be more sustainable, because we were the first people on the planet that actually experienced climate change. And there's stories from elders. I'm based in Cairns that go back to the change in the weather with the water table, that they used to be able to walk out to the reef, and there was a lot less water around in those days. So I just want to acknowledge that we're missing out on this amazing knowledge, and it's going to really help our climate journey. So I'm a huge supporter of that. And I guess the other Cairns is a 20% Indigenous population. And before I jumped into startups, I worked in the construction industry and spent a decade working in Indigenous communities across Northern Australia and especially Cape York. And I'm just a real supporter because they were so stuck with decisions made on them that, you know, haven't enabled any transition in what they're kind of doing. So a classic example that I tell people is I was an electrical contractor, so I was working in a community called Lockhart River, and one of the elders in a house had a smoke alarm that ran out of battery. I had 3 Sparkies working for me up there. We weren't allowed to change that smoke detector or put another battery in there. And they had to hire a plane and fly someone up from Cairns on a public holiday that cost like $25,000 to fix that smoke detector. So there's just this massive waste of resources that local communities don't have a say. And I've just seen that time and time again across communities in Northern Australia. So having that voice to be able to write their own destiny and change transition is going to make a huge impact. Thanks for hearing out me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daryl, for sharing your perspectives on this. And I think there's an obvious connection with climate tech innovation. And Camille, I wanted to throw to you on that.
Yeah, Daryl, we haven't met yet, but your story and your journey brought tears to my eyes because it's very similar to my family's journey. And, you know, this is a very common story for First Nations people, unfortunately, in this country. So my great-great-grandmother was taken off country, and that's where we lost a lot of our connection. And it was my grandmother that hid Aboriginality from the rest of the family. And it was my mum that did a lot of work and a lot of digging to start to reconnect with our mob and our land. So my great-great-grandmother was born on the Castlereagh River in Coonabarabran on Kamilaroi country. And it's been a really hard and traumatic journey trying to find our connection and find our place in that mob and start to, you know, learn what is our traditional knowledge. And still to this day, you know, a lot of my aunties don't actually acknowledge the Aboriginality. And my family and I call ourselves the forgotten mob because, you know, we feel the Aboriginality, and I feel my Aboriginality express itself in how I care for country. And that's, for those who don't know, my company is Xylo Systems, and we build technology for wildlife. So I feel that as an extension of me caring for country. And I think this voice is so important, because had we had a voice, had we had a treaty, maybe none of this would have happened, and maybe I'd still have those connections to our mob and still be caring for country on land. So I think it's really important that we, you know, consider those types of voices and how we can support our First Nations people moving forward. But to bring it back in our climate tech solution and what the community here is building, First Nations people, not just here in this country, but around the world, are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. And the solutions that we're building need to have First Nations voices embedded in them, whether that's, you know, whether you're working in the biosphere or, you know, your carbon offsetting and credit space. We need those Indigenous voices to move our solutions forward. We need those Indigenous voices because they are absolute key to regenerating our environments, regenerating our ecosystems, and stabilizing our climate. I know there's lots of questions. I always get lots of questions of where do you start? I mean, you know, considering a Yes campaign is a perfect place for you to start on this journey, but in your own climate tech solutions, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your local Indigenous mob and start learning about them, start building that knowledge base and start building that relationship and trust.
Thank you so much. I don't know what else to add after this. If there are any final questions or final things to say, I'll throw to you, Bridie, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think I just want to thank Daryl and Camille for sharing as well. It was really great. I'm really passionate about like climate advocacy and stuff, but obviously I'm not in that space. So it was really cool to hear from you guys. And just thanks for everyone coming along today. had some tech issues and jumped around a little bit, but hopefully you got something out of it. I just really encourage everyone to, head to our website, ulurustatement.org. We do like starter yarns as well, and really encourage other people to come along to a briefing or get educated as well. The way we're going to win this is through education and through, social media campaigns like the ones we're doing now. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much, Charlotte, for convening this session. As many of you know, there's probably less than 3 months until the referendum. So please go out there, have those conversations, do what you can in your communities. And yeah, please reach out if there's any other ideas you have or ways you want to support.
Thank you so much. I will share those resources that Bryony and Bridie have shared. And if you do want to host a yarning circle or get involved in more of these briefings, please do let me know and I can pass on your contact details. Thank you so much, Daryl, Camille, Bridie, and Bryony. And thank you everyone for joining us and learning some more. Knowing that the pamphlets can come out that aren't fact checked, we need to arm ourselves with as much information as possible and share those stories far and wide. So thank you very, very much.